They were the lions of Christendom, holy warriors sworn to poverty, kneeling in the blood-soaked earth of the Levant, clad in white mantles marked by a crimson cross. And yet, behind the solemn vows and sharpened steel, there existed a quieter power, one not forged in battle, but in ink. Imagine for a moment that you are a nobleman in the year 1150, standing in the dusty courtyard of a Templar preceptory in southern France. Before you lies the most perilous journey a medieval soul could undertake, the road to Jerusalem. The dangers are not distant, they are immediate, suffocating. Bandits haunt the Alpine passes. Pirates prowl the Mediterranean without allegiance to crown or creed. And should you survive the journey itself, you arrive in a land at war, carrying the very thing that marks you for death, your wealth. To carry gold is to invite violence. To leave it behind is to invite ruin. For centuries, this paradox remained unsolved. It ruined pilgrims, it killed merchants, it broke noblemen far from home, not only through the sword, but through starvation, theft, and the silent cruelty of being financially stranded in foreign lands with no recourse. And then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, the Templars solved it. Without proclamation, without decree, without even a name for what they were building, these warrior monks, men sworn to poverty, chastity, and obedience, devised a system so elegant, so structurally profound, that its logic still pulses beneath the surface of your world today. Every bank transfer, every loan, every invisible movement of money across borders. They did not call it banking, but what they created was something far more enduring than any fortress or battlefield victory. While the world watched their swords, the Templars were constructing an empire of paper, debt, and trust. They did not merely guard the road to Jerusalem, they owned the road itself. From the dust of Palestine to the royal courts of Europe, they built the foundations of financial instruments that would come to define civilization. The check, the loan, the network, what we might now call the shadow of a bank. Before there was Wall Street, there was the temple. And like all powers built in silence, its rise was immense and its fall absolute. This is not merely a story of crusaders and kings. It is the story of an idea born under pressure, forged in necessity, and powerful enough to outlive the men who conceived it. Because the Knight Templars did not set out to invent finance. They set out to survive. And in doing so, they accidentally built the world. Before there was Wall Street, there was the temple. And like all powers built in silence, its rise was immense and its fall absolute. This is not merely a story of crusaders and kings. It is the story of an idea born under pressure, forged in necessity, and powerful enough to outlive the men who conceived it. Because the Knight Templars did not set out to invent finance. They set out to survive. And in doing so, they accidentally built the world.
It is worth pausing here, at the threshold of this story, to ask a quieter, more unsettling question. Why does any of this matter now? Why should a world of satellites, algorithms, and digital currencies concern itself with a brotherhood of armored monks who rode beneath a desert sun nearly 1,000 years ago? because the world you inhabit is built upon their answer. We live in an age where money itself is dissolving into abstraction, where value moves at the speed of light, where central banks experiment with programmable currency, and where the power to control financial infrastructure has become one of the defining contests of our time. And yet, beneath all of this innovation, there remains a fragile, invisible foundation: trust. The story of the Templars is not a medieval curiosity. It is the origin story of institutional trust. Every time you deposit money into a bank and accept in return not gold or silver, but a number on a screen, you are participating in a system whose logic was first formalized not in the Renaissance, not in the great banking houses of Europe, but in the austere stone fortresses of a 12th century military order. Long before the great names of finance emerged, the Templars had already answered a question that still defines our world. How can value exist without being physically held? How can trust travel? To understand them is to understand the system you are living inside, and that system is now under strain. We are living through a moment of profound disruption, where blockchain protocols attempt to replace institutions with code, where artificial intelligence begins to assess creditworthiness without human judgment, where the global financial system itself shows signs of fragmentation. The old promise that a trusted intermediary can hold your wealth while you sleep, travel, or trade, and that its word is as solid as gold, is no longer universally accepted. And so the ancient question returns: who deserves to be trusted with value? The Templars answered it with discipline, with reach, with a network so vast and a reputation so unassailable that even kings became their debtors. Today, we are still searching for an equivalent answer. But there is another lesson here, one spoken more quietly and written in darker ink. Because the Templars fell not due to miscalculation or fraud or the slow erosion of confidence. They fell because they became too powerful, too wealthy, too indispensable, too independent of the very kings who depended on them. And so, in the early 14th century, the machinery of the state turned against them, not through competition, but through force, through accusation, through torture, through the careful orchestration of fear and the seizure of everything they had built. It was not a market correction. It was an erasure. And this pattern, the destruction of financial power when it begins to rival sovereign authority, is not confined to the medieval world. It echoes across centuries. It is a pattern we may be witnessing once again, as new financial systems emerge beyond the full control of nations, and as those nations begin to respond. So, as we continue this journey, consider this carefully. Are we watching history unfold or repeat? And when new temples of finance rise in code rather than stone, will they be allowed to endure, or will they meet the same fate as the first?
To understand how the Templars came to wield such extraordinary financial power, we must first step backward, not into battle, but into the world that made them necessary. A world almost unrecognizable to the modern mind. Europe in the 11th century was not a continent of nations, but a fractured mosaic of feudal territories. Each region spoke its own economic language, its own coinage, its own weights and measures, its own tolls, its own rules. There was no unified system, no shared standard, no trust beyond the horizon of one's own lord. The great monetary order of Rome, once binding the Mediterranean into a single economic organism, had long since collapsed into memory. And in the 5 centuries that followed, nothing had replaced it. To travel was to translate value endlessly. A merchant moving from Flanders to the markets of Champagne might pass through a dozen currencies, each one fluctuating, each one manipulated, each exchange quietly eroding his wealth. Trade still existed, yes, but it moved slowly, cautiously, burdened by uncertainty, a hidden tax on every transaction. And then the world shifted. In the year 1095, at the Council of Clermont, a call was issued, one that would echo across every village, every court, every cathedral in Europe, a call to reclaim Jerusalem. What followed was not merely a military campaign, it was an economic awakening. The First Crusade did something Europe had not witnessed in centuries. It mobilized capital on a massive scale. Nobles sold land, borrowed heavily, liquidated estates. Entire fortunes were converted into motion to fund a journey across thousands of miles of hostile terrain. Armies had to be fed, equipped, transported. Supply lines stretched from England and France to the Levant, and the existing financial system, such as it was, could not bear the weight. There were moneylenders, certainly. There were early merchant networks in places like Genoa and Venice, but there was no institution, none with the reach, the authority, the protection, and the discipline to operate across the full span of Christendom and beyond. And so, into this vacuum, they emerged. Around the year 1119, a small brotherhood of knights gathered under a single purpose, led by a man named Hugh de Payens, obscure to history, yet destined to shape it. Their mission was simple: to protect pilgrims, to guard the dangerous road from the port of Jaffa to Jerusalem. For their headquarters, they were granted a wing of a royal palace built upon what was believed to be the site of Solomon's temple, and so they took their name, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, the Templars. In their early years, they were nothing remarkable, few in number, limited in resources, barely visible in the grand currents of history. So obscure, in fact, that much of what we know of their founding survives only through the writings of a single advocate, Bernard of Clairvaux. And yet, within a single decade, that obscurity would vanish, because in 1129, at the Council of Troy, something extraordinary occurred. Before an assembly of church and secular power, Bernard championed their cause and secured for them something far more powerful than weapons or land: a rule, a charter, an identity. What followed, reinforced by papal decrees in the years ahead, transformed the Templars into something the medieval world had never seen. They were exempt from taxes. They could collect revenues. They answered not to kings, nor to local lords, but directly to the papacy. They could move freely across borders, accumulate wealth, retain the spoils of war. In a world defined by fragmentation, they became boundaryless. In a world constrained by local authority, they became untouchable. What emerged was not yet a bank, but it was something just as powerful, an institution operating outside the normal rules of geography and governance, protected by a higher authority and trusted across vast distances, an entity that could hold value, move value, and defend value. The implications were immense, because this combination, mobility, protection, credibility, and independence, is not unique to the medieval world. It is the same structure that defines every dominant financial system that would follow, from the great banks of early modern Europe to the offshore markets of the 20th century, to the digital networks emerging today. And so, as the Templars begin to expand, to acquire land, wealth, and influence, understand this: you are not simply watching the rise of a military order. You are watching the early architecture of global finance take form.
The precise moment at which the Templars became something more than warriors is difficult to see. There is no single turning point, no declaration, no conscious transformation, because the Templars themselves did not understand what they were becoming. And yet, by the middle of the 12th century, something extraordinary had taken shape. From scattered records, preserved in royal archives, papal correspondence, and fragments of their own internal documents, historians have been able to reconstruct the outline of a system, not of conquest, but of movement, of value without weight. Imagine again our traveler. He arrives at a Templar house in Paris, or London, or perhaps Genoa. He carries with him a fortune in coin, heavy, dangerous, and impossible to conceal. But instead of guarding it, he surrenders it. He places his gold into the hands of the Templars, and in return, he is given a piece of parchment, sealed, encoded, a document bearing the authority of the order itself. On it is written a promise that somewhere, far from where he now stands, that value will be returned. He travels across mountains, across seas, through lands where coin would betray him. And when he arrives, he presents the letter, and the gold reappears. Not the same coins, but the same value, intact. What the Templars created here was not merely a convenience, it was a transformation. A single instrument, part receipt, part credit note, part currency exchange, part guarantee, backed by a network that stretched across the known world. A system that removed the need to carry wealth while preserving access to it. It is difficult to overstate the sophistication of this idea, because what they had built, without naming it, was banking, not as a place, but as a network. By the mid-12th century, that network had grown vast. Templar houses, preceptories, commanderies spread across England, France, the Iberian Peninsula, Italy, the German lands, and into the Crusader states of the Levant. Originally, these outposts existed to support war, to train men, to move supplies, to sustain a military presence in distant lands, but their secondary function would prove far more powerful than their swords.
because wherever the Templars went, their system followed, and wherever their system existed, trust could travel. As the century progressed, their financial role expanded rapidly, driven not by design, but by necessity. War is expensive, crusading even more so. When Jerusalem fell in 1187 to the forces of Saladin, the shock that rippled across Christendom did not diminish the Templars' importance, it intensified it. Because mounting a response, a new crusade, required vast sums of money, moved across vast distances with precision and reliability. And there was only one institution capable of doing it. Kings themselves began to rely on them. Richard of England, preparing for the Third Crusade, entrusted the Templars with the movement of his war funds, not because they were convenient, but because they were dependable. And in finance, dependence is power. Nowhere did this relationship grow more intricate than in France. In Paris, the Templars established a fortress known simply as the Temple, a structure that would come to be in time the financial heart of the kingdom. Within its walls, treasure accumulated, royal deposits, state revenues, the machinery of governance itself. The Templars became more than facilitators. They became custodians, treasurers to the crown, managers of accounts, architects of a system the monarchy itself could not build. And over time, a boundary began to blur. Where did the king's treasury end and the Templars begin? No one could say with certainty, and therein lay the danger. Because by making themselves indispensable, the Templars had entered the most perilous space in any political system: control over the flow of wealth. At first, the arrangement was mutually beneficial. The crown gained efficiency, access to credit, and a trusted steward of its finances. The Templars gained prestige, protection, and influence beyond measure. But dependency is never stable. It tilts, and when it tilts, it breaks. That break would come in the form of a king, Philip IV of France, a man remembered as the Fair for his appearance, but feared in truth for something far colder. He inherited a kingdom strained by war, campaigns against England, costly conflicts in Flanders, ambitions that far exceeded the revenues of the crown. The result was constant shortage, a monarchy in need of money and running out of ways to find it. Philip had already shown what he was willing to do. In 1306, he expelled the Jews from France, seizing their assets, erasing debts owed to them, and converting persecution into profit. It was not merely an act of prejudice, it was policy, a demonstration that when the state required wealth, it would take it. And so, as Philip looked across his kingdom, at the immense, untouchable wealth of the Templars, at an institution that held the crown's own finances, that answered not to him, but to Rome, the question began to form. Quietly at first, then with growing clarity. Not how to work with them, but how to remove them.
To understand why the Templars became so dangerous to kings, to crowns, to the very structure of power itself, you must look past the legend, past the armor, past the vows, and into the machinery.
because what they built was not accidental. It was precise, layered, and far more sophisticated than the world around it was prepared to confront. What the Templars created was, in essence, a complete financial system, one that solved the fundamental economic problems of their age with a clarity that would not be matched again for centuries. The first pillar of that system was custody, not conquest, custody, the simple yet profound act of holding wealth safely. In the medieval world, this was no small matter. To possess wealth was to risk losing it through theft, fire, betrayal, or war. Castles and churches offered refuge, yes, but they offered no system, no standardized records, no reliable access. The Templars changed this. They did not merely store wealth, they protected it with fortified structures, disciplined oversight, and something far rarer, a reputation that could not easily be questioned. Their treasuries were not symbolic, they were defended by trained warriors. Their records were not casual, they were structured, monitored, and enforced by rule. And most importantly, your wealth did not remain trapped where you left it. It could move from one end of Christendom to the other. The second pillar was credit, because once wealth can be held securely, it can be lent, and the Templars lent, carefully, deliberately, and often to the most powerful men in the world, kings, crowns, states. They understood risk. They demanded collateral, land, revenues, privileges. They assessed stability, not in theory, but in practice. And though the Church forbade the open charging of interest, the Templars, like all sophisticated lenders of their time, found ways to operate within and around those constraints. Through exchange rates, through fees, through carefully structured agreements that preserved the appearance of piety while securing the reality of profit. This was not primitive finance. It was adaptive, intelligent, quietly exact. The third pillar was exchange, because Europe, as we have seen, was not one economy, but many. Coins varied, values shifted, rulers debased currency to stretch their power. To move money across borders was not simply difficult, it was unstable. The Templars imposed order on that chaos. They became trusted arbiters of value. They converted currencies with consistency, with credibility, with a level of reliability that merchants and nobles alike came to depend upon. And in doing so, they did something subtle yet transformative. They reduced uncertainty. And when uncertainty falls, commerce expands, trade flows more freely, networks grow, and the institution that enables it gains power. The fourth pillar emerged naturally from the first three, a system not just of holding, lending, and exchanging wealth, but of moving it at scale, quietly, efficiently, across vast distances. When a king needed funds in a distant province, the Templars did not load carts with coin and send them across dangerous roads. They moved numbers, balances, entries within their own system. Funds deposited in one place appeared in another, settled not through physical transfer, but through internal reconciliation. It was, in essence, a clearing system, a precursor to what we now recognize as correspondent banking,
a network where value travels without ever being seen. And this, more than anything, was their true power, because the Templars were no longer simply participants in the economy, they were becoming its infrastructure, the invisible framework through which money moved, the trusted intermediary between distance and value, the system beneath the system. And this is what made them dangerous. Not their wealth alone, not their influence, but their position. Because when an institution becomes the mechanism through which power itself flows, it ceases to be merely useful. It becomes indispensable. And history has shown time and again that what is indispensable can also become intolerable, especially to a king in need.
If we step back now from the stone walls of the temple, from the dust of the Crusades, from the parchment and seal, a pattern begins to emerge, one that feels uncomfortably familiar, because the system the Templars built was not a historical anomaly. It was a prototype. The problems they solved, how to store wealth securely, how to move value across distance, how to lend at scale, how to translate between currencies, are not medieval problems. They are eternal ones. And every financial system since has been an answer to the same questions. Only the tools have changed, not the logic. Consider first the question at the heart of all finance: trust. The Templars were trusted not by accident, but by design. Their credibility rested on three foundations: a sacred mission which gave moral weight to their promises, a vast and visible network which proved their reach and resilience, and a record built slowly, transaction by transaction, of honoring their obligations. Mission, scale, reliability. This triad has not disappeared. It has simply evolved. Modern institutions derive trust differently, but the structure is the same. Central banks anchor their credibility in independence and stability. Global intermediaries operate as neutral conduits between competing powers. Financial networks span continents, processing transactions invisibly, yet dependably. What the Templars achieved with sealed letters and mounted couriers, modern systems achieve with encryption and light itself. But the underlying requirement has not changed. You must believe that the system will hold. Now consider something more subtle, something more powerful: the ability to move value beyond the reach of any single authority. This was the Templars' greatest innovation, because their allegiance was not to a king, but to something higher. They answered to Rome. And that exemption from local control, from local taxation, from local interference, allowed them to operate across borders in a way no ordinary institution could. They existed between jurisdictions, not entirely inside any one of them, and that is precisely what made them indispensable. Today, that same principle persists in different forms. Financial centers that operate beyond the full reach of national regulation, global networks that connect economies without belonging entirely to any one of them, systems that are tied to states yet not fully controlled by them,
spaces where money flows just beyond the edge of sovereignty. The names have changed, the technology has advanced, but the structure remains. And then there is the final parallel, the most dangerous one, the relationship between financial power and political authority. The Templars rose because they were useful. They became powerful because they were trusted, but they were destroyed because they became unavoidable. When a state depends on a financial institution, it tolerates it. When that dependence deepens, it accommodates it. But when that institution grows so large, so embedded, that it begins to rival the state itself, the calculation changes. Control must be reasserted, sometimes gradually, through regulation, through oversight, through quiet absorption into the machinery of the state, and sometimes more abruptly, more violently. The fall of the Templars was not simply an act of medieval brutality. It was a resolution, a moment when political power confronted financial power and chose to eliminate it. That pattern did not end in the 14th century. It echoes across time. Whenever institutions become too central to fail, too large to ignore, too independent to control, the question returns. Not whether they will be challenged, but how. And so, as new financial architectures emerge in our own time, digital, decentralized, global in reach, consider the precedent that has already been set. Because the tools may be new, the language may be different, but the tension remains exactly as it was, between those who build the systems of value and those who claim the right to rule them. And history suggests that this tension is never resolved quietly.
What we are about to witness is not merely a fall. It is a procedure, a calculated dismantling of power, so precise, so deliberate, that it remains one of the clearest case studies in history of how financial institutions are destroyed when they begin to stand apart from the authority that surrounds them. Between 1307 and 1312, the Knights Templar were not defeated in battle. They were neutralized. And the method matters, because it reveals something far deeper than medieval intrigue. It reveals a pattern. The charges, when first proclaimed, were shocking: heresy, blasphemy, obscene rituals, the worship of an idol whispered as Baphomet. To the medieval mind, these were not minor accusations, they were existential. But to the modern eye, and to careful historians, something else becomes clear. These charges were not discovered, they were constructed, extracted under torture, reinforced through repetition, codified into legal form, not to uncover truth, but to justify action. Because beneath the language of religion lay the logic of finance. By 1306, Philip IV of France stood in a position both powerful and precarious. His wars had drained the treasury. His revenues could not keep pace with ambition. His attempts to manipulate the currency had destabilized confidence, provoking unrest in Paris itself. And at the center of this fragile system stood the Templars. They were his creditors. They held his deposits. They operated beyond his authority. To Philip, they represented three converging pressures: a debt that constrained him, a reservoir of wealth he could not access, and an institution whose independence challenged his sovereignty. Seen clearly, the objective emerges: eliminate the debt, seize the assets, destroy the autonomy. This was not primarily persecution, it was liquidation. But to achieve it required something extraordinary: coordination. On the morning of Friday, October 13th, 1307, across the entire Kingdom of France, royal officers moved in unison. Orders, sealed in advance, were opened simultaneously. Templars were arrested en masse. No warning, no resistance, no time to disperse wealth or escape. It was a feat of administrative precision almost unimaginable for its time, a kingdom acting as one. And yet, on the eve of this operation, a silence opens in the record. At the port of La Rochelle, the Templar fleet vanished. No battle, no seizure, no confirmed destination. Gone. To England, to Scotland, or further still, into the Atlantic unknown. History offers theories, but no answers. What follows the arrests is not justice, but pressure. Years of it. Interrogations conducted under torture, confessions extracted, then recanted, narratives built, then enforced, an institution slowly reshaped into its own accusation. Even the papacy, once the Templars' shield, began to bend. Pope Clement V hesitated. He understood the implications. The Templars answered directly to Rome. Their destruction would weaken papal authority itself. But Philip's leverage was overwhelming: political pressure, personal vulnerability, and the implicit threat of further destabilization. Resistance gave way. At the Council of Vienne in 1312, the order was formally suppressed, its assets reassigned, officially to other religious orders, but in practice, much of it flowed into the hands of the crown, exactly as intended. And then, the final act. In 1314, on the Ile de la Cité, the last Grand Master of the Templars, Jacques de Molay, stood condemned. He had confessed, he had submitted, and then at the end, he withdrew it all. He declared the order innocent. He rejected the narrative imposed upon him, and for that, he was burned alive. Some chroniclers, writing in the shadow of the event, record that as the flames rose, he issued a final summons that both Philip and Clement would answer before God within a year. Whether these words were truly spoken, we cannot know, but what followed was noted by all. Both men were dead within the year. Coincidence, perhaps, but to the medieval mind, it was something more. A form of balance, a restoration of moral order where earthly justice had failed. And this, perhaps, is why the story endures, not because of its legends, but because of its clarity. An institution rises, it solves real problems, it becomes trusted, it becomes powerful, and then, when that power begins to stand apart from the state, it is not competed with, it is not regulated, it is removed. Not always with fire, not always with chains, but always with intent.
and always with a story constructed to make it seem necessary.
The fire that consumed the Templars did not consume the system they built, because systems like theirs are not optional. They are answers to problems that do not disappear simply because an institution does. Money still needed to move. Wealth still needed protection. Kings still needed credit. Trade still demanded trust across distance. And so, when the Templars vanished, they left behind something far more powerful than ruins. They left a vacuum. And history does not tolerate a vacuum for long. The 14th century, into which this absence opened, was not a time of stability. It was an age of crisis. The Black Death swept across Europe, collapsing populations and economies alike. The 100 Years' War drained treasuries and demanded constant financing. And across the continent, sovereign defaults began to ripple through the fragile architecture of credit. The need for financial infrastructure did not diminish, it intensified. And into that pressure, new actors emerged, not monks, not warriors, but merchants. In the cities of Florence, Siena, and Genoa, banking houses began to rise, family-run institutions that would inherit, adapt, and expand the mechanisms the Templars had pioneered. Among them were the great Florentine families, the Bardi family, and the Peruzzi family. They lent vast sums to kings, most notably to Edward III of England, whose ambitions in France would ignite the early phases of the 100 Years' War. Once again, the pattern revealed itself. Credit extended upward to sovereign power. Dependence formed, and then, inevitably, the break. When Edward defaulted in the 1340s, the consequences were catastrophic. Entire banking houses collapsed. Fortunes vanished, a reminder, stark and unforgiving, that lending to kings is never without risk. And yet, even in failure, the structure endured. Because these Italian bankers were not inventing something entirely new. They were operating within a framework already established. Letters of exchange, cross-city banking relationships, early forms of systematic accounting, all of it built upon foundations the Templars had laid. Then, in the 15th century, the system reached a new level of refinement. In Florence, a single family would rise above the rest, the Medici Bank. Here, the model matured. A network of branches stretched across Europe. Funds moved through internal accounts rather than physical transfer. Clients ranged from merchants to monarchs to the papacy itself. In structure, it was unmistakable. A geographically dispersed financial network unified by internal accounting and shared control. A secular echo of the Templar system. But there was a difference, a crucial one. The Medici and all the Italian houses operated within the reach of political power. They had no sacred exemption, no extraterritorial shield. They were subject to the laws of their cities and the pressures of their rulers, which meant they could be influenced, constrained, or destroyed. The lesson of the Templars had been learned. Never again would such a system be allowed to exist entirely beyond sovereign control. And so, what follows across the centuries is not a straight line of progress, but a series of attempts. Attempts to recreate trust, to rebuild networks, to enable the movement of value at scale, while ensuring that ultimate authority remained anchored in the state. This long evolution, stretching from the ashes of the Templars to the early modern world, would eventually produce something new. Institutions designed not merely to facilitate finance, but to stabilize it. In 1609, in the trading hub of Amsterdam, the Bank of Amsterdam was founded. Its purpose was simple and radical: to restore trust in money itself. Amid a flood of debased coins, it offered a stable unit of account, backed not by faith alone, but by disciplined reserve. It was, in some ways, a step backward, limiting the kind of expansive lending that earlier systems had enabled. But in return, it gained something invaluable: credibility. And with it, dominance. For nearly a century, Amsterdam became the financial center of the world. Then, in 1694, amid the pressures of war, another transformation occurred. In London, the Bank of England was created, not as a neutral institution, but as a partnership between state and finance. Its purpose was explicit: to fund war, to mobilize private capital in service of sovereign power. Here, the relationship between money and the state was no longer ambiguous. It was formalized, structured, enduring, and trusted. What had once been achieved through sacred mission was now achieved through political design, parliamentary backing, institutional continuity, demonstrated reliability. Different tools, same objective: to build a system people would believe in. And yet, if you look closely, beneath these layers of evolution, you can still see the original shape: a network, a promise, a mechanism for moving value across distance. The Templars did not survive, but their solution did. Refined, replicated, reabsorbed into the structures of power that once destroyed it. And so the story does not end with their fall. It accelerates. Because from this point forward, finance would no longer be an experiment. It would become the system that governs the world.
And now we arrive at the center of the story. Not the battles, not the betrayals, but the truth that made all of it possible. The lesson of the Templars, quiet, almost invisible beneath the noise of history, is this: money is not a thing. It never was. It is a relationship, a promise structured, repeated, and believed. The Templars did not create wealth in the way we instinctively imagine. They did not mine gold from the earth, nor produce goods from labor. They created something far more elusive. They created trust. A nobleman in Paris could hand over a chest of coins and walk away with nothing but parchment. No gold, no silver, no physical guarantee. And yet, when he arrived in Acre, that parchment would be honored. Not because of what it was, but because of who stood behind it. An institution, a reputation, a system that others believed in. This was the revelation, that value does not reside in the metal, but in the agreement. To the medieval mind, this was not obvious. Gold and silver were tangible, heavy, real. A piece of paper was not. To accept it as equal required something extraordinary: confidence. And the Templars proved that if an institution was strong enough, disciplined enough, connected enough, reliable enough, that confidence could scale. It could replace metal. It could move across continents. It could transform the limits of economic life. And once that idea existed, it could never be undone. Every financial system that followed is built on this same foundation. When the Bank of England issued banknotes, those notes were not gold, they were promises. Promises backed by the credibility of the state. When the world gathered at Bretton Woods Conference to construct a global monetary system, it did so on trust, anchored symbolically to gold, but functionally to belief in the system itself. And when, in 1971, Richard Nixon severed that final link, ending the convertibility of dollars into gold, the system did not collapse, because the gold had never truly been the foundation. It had been the reassurance, the symbol, much like the seal on a Templar letter. What remained, what always remained, was trust in the institution behind the promise. And now we stand at another threshold, because that trust is being tested. The system we have inherited, global, interconnected, dependent on institutions and intermediaries, is beginning to strain, not from a single cause, but from many. The fragmentation of global payments, the use of financial systems as instruments of geopolitical power, the emergence of new technologies, cryptographic, decentralized, that propose a different answer. Trust without institutions, code instead of credibility. At the same time, the great sovereign issuers, the states that anchor the system, face pressures of their own. Debt accumulates, confidence is questioned, and the quiet assumption that these institutions will always honor their promises begins slowly to erode. This is not unprecedented. History has seen it before. Moments when the system itself becomes uncertain, when the question returns with urgency: who can be trusted with value? The Templars answered that question once, with discipline, with network, with belief. They built the first great financial architecture on that foundation, and they were destroyed when that architecture became too powerful to remain independent. Yet the idea survived. It always does. Rebuilt in new forms, adapted to new realities, carried forward by those who must solve the same problem again. And now it is our turn, because the system we rely on, this vast invisible web of promises, is not permanent. It is constructed, maintained, believed into existence. And if that belief falters, it will be replaced. Not by a single invention, not by a single institution, but by a new structure of trust, forged, as it always has been, through pressure, through conflict, through the slow and uncertain process of deciding what we are willing to believe in next.
On a cold morning in the spring of 1314, in the heart of Paris, on a narrow stretch of land along the Seine, long since absorbed into the stone and memory of the Île de la Cité, an old man stood in the flames. Jacques de Molay had been imprisoned for 7 years. He had confessed under torture. He had watched his order dissolve. He had seen brothers scattered, broken, burned. Everything the institution had given him, power, purpose, identity, had been stripped away. And in that final moment, he chose not silence, but defiance. He declared the order innocent. He rejected the charges. He spoke, as he understood it, the truth. Whether those words were truly spoken, we cannot know. The chronicles that preserve them were written later, shaped by grief, by outrage, by a human need for justice in a story that had offered so little of it. But this much is certain. The institution he served was gone. Its wealth seized, its network dismantled, its power erased. And yet, the world it had built did not disappear, because the need remained. The gold the Templars once held has long since scattered, spent on wars, debts, and the ambitions of kings. Even the dynasty that destroyed them, the line of Philip IV of France, would collapse within a generation, its legacy fading into the ordinary fragility of history. The parchment letters they issued have turned to dust. Their fortresses have become ruins, foundations, or simply absence. But what they discovered endured. The idea that value does not require metal, that trust can move across distance, that a network can carry wealth without carrying gold. This did not burn. It survived. It was rebuilt, refined, absorbed into every system that followed. And so, though we rarely pause to consider it, we are all heirs of the Templars, not of their swords, not of their vows, not of their fall, but of their most profound invention, the transformation of trust into power. Every number you see on a screen, every balance you accept without question, every transaction that moves invisibly across the world, rests on the same principle they proved centuries ago, that a promise, if believed, can become reality. And now, in our own time, that belief is being tested once again. Institutions are questioned, systems are strained, new architectures rise, claiming to replace trust with code, authority with mathematics. And the question returns, as it always does: what are we willing to believe in? Because every financial system, no matter how complex, how advanced, how global, is at its core a story, a shared agreement, a fragile consensus that the promises we rely on will be kept. And the moment that belief falters, the system does not weaken, it ends. So as you drift from this story, consider not only the past, but the present, because the flames that consumed the Templars did not destroy their world. They revealed it, and what they revealed is still with you now. In every transaction, in every institution, in every quiet act of trust, a system sustained not by gold, but by belief. And like all beliefs, it endures as long as we choose to hold it.